The UN has warned about possible disruptions to food supplies following the February 6 earthquakes that devastated one of Turkey's key agricultural regions. While the twin tremors damaged many cities in Turkiye's south, it also wreaked havoc on rural areas. In response, the Turkish government has pledged financial assistance to farmers, including cash payments and subsidies to secure food supply chains. Let's take a look at this report.
Rescue teams from the Turkish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry saved this cow from the rubble on the 15th day of the Kahramanmaraş earthquakes. But not all animals were as lucky. According to reports, at least 30,000 cattle from the quake-hit area have died. The 10 provinces are accounted for 15% of Turkiye's livestock. And now the surviving farmers are trying to get back on their feet.
We have no straws, no silage. They're all buried under the rubble. Even if I have money, I can't go and find animal feed. Even if I find it, people will ask for double the price. But if the cash and feed support keeps coming, we can continue with animal husbandry. If we don't get help, we'll have to sell these animals.
The state-owned Meat and Milk Board has already bought nearly 500 animals from breeders, and the Turkish Grain Board is set to unconditionally buy all cereals and pulses. The government has also laid out plans on how things will be handled. That includes nearly $80 million in feed support, more than $2.5 million of agricultural support payments, as well as about $150 million of diesel and fertilizer subsidies, which will also be transferred to the families of the deceased farmers. One public bank has also postponed repayments on the low-interest loans of farmers in the earthquake zones.
All our units and ministries are working intensely. Although we have a high capability of dealing with such disasters, it is a very big disaster. As the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, we will do everything in our power to support our citizens, especially our farmers in rural areas, and make sure our agricultural production keeps running smoothly.
The quake's devastation is clearly visible. Fault fractures can be seen in agricultural lands, while other areas are now underwater. Another concern is the dust from the rubble, which could contaminate underground aquifers and fields. The 10 affected provinces, except for Malatya, are in the southeast Anatolia and Mediterranean regions, and they constitute 20% of the country's total crop production. For instance, these two regions combined are responsible for 59% of the country's total corn production, while southeast Anatolia is able to take care of 58% of the total cotton production. And Malatya alone has a 65% share when it comes to farming apricots, while Osmaniye produces around 40% of peanuts in the country. But once the harvest season comes around, some experts worry there won't be enough workers and farmers in these areas due to quake survivors relocating. Such issues are also expected to cause a rise in food prices.
Our agricultural production must not be interrupted. We are working hard to keep this population in the countryside.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has also expressed its concerns. It says it's important to determine the extent of the damage and prioritize accordingly, and that it's working with the Turkish government to restore the agricultural infrastructure. Zeynep Gökçe, TRT World.
And now for more on this, let's speak to Sharon George. She is a senior lecturer at Keele University, where she researches and teaches sustainability and green technology. And I'm also joined by Aylin Oney Tan. She is a food writer and culinary researcher, and she joins me from Ankara. Ladies, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So nearly 3 weeks have passed since Turkey was devastated by twin earthquakes, and now the focus has shifted from rescue operations to cleanup and assessing the long-term damage in the region. So Sharon, the area that was struck was an important agricultural region for Türkiye. What could you tell us about the shape of this region in terms of agriculture, of course?
Well, of course, this is an area that provides it's an important economic base. This area relies on agriculture for its economic development and its survival, really. So already this area was already struggling before this because of other pressures. We've got, with food production comes challenges around economics and world politics and climate change, and all of these things are pushing this area. And so this has gone from being a very productive area, an area that provided that vital kind of lifeline of income for the area, has been hit, and now because of the earthquake, it's going to be very difficult for this area to bounce back, and it's going to need help to get back to where it was and able to have that economic activity in that area restored.
So, Aylin, the government pledged it would provide financial assistance to farmers, including cash payments to secure food production and supply chain subsidies, and delaying some of the loans. What further incentives should be introduced, and do you think the current incentives are enough?
The consequences of the earthquake is devastating, and measures should be taken to sustain the livelihood of the people living in the countryside whose sole income is agriculture and husbandry and the livestock. They have their animals there, and they cannot leave the site. They cannot just migrate, but they cannot also live there. So there has to be measures to sustain their existence in the countryside, and the countryside is feeding the urban cities, the city centers, all the trade, and also the gastronomy and everything, and the whole area is also playing on gastronomy, tourism, and so on, is dependent on the production of the countryside. So we cannot really separate the urban city centers in the region and elsewhere. Istanbul is practically fed as a megapole by this countryside. So we have to find ways of keeping people there.
So, Sharon, in past earthquakes, what have other governments have done globally to contain any damage to the food supply system after such disaster?
Well, I think this isn't just isolated to earthquakes. We see natural disasters like floods and storm surges. This is something that's happening on a more regular basis because of pressures from climate change. We're seeing areas being flooded and agriculture areas being lost or becoming unfarmable. So we're seeing this push to human migration to the megacities around the world, and it is a trend that we do need to really watch globally. And I think there needs to be more visibility. This isn't, I think the world can watch the earthquake and watch this and see it as an event and think, oh well, that's the recovery is this short-term effect, but it's not. It's a long-term effect, and it is kind of maintaining that infrastructure long term that's going to be really important under very, very challenging conditions. And that's not something that can be just done locally or even just nationally. I think this is a global problem, and it does need global assistance to be able to help regions like this to respond to these shocks that happen. I think we're losing our resilience.
So do you think the international assistance is enough? What's needed the most at the moment?
No, I think there needs to be, to unlock that assistance as well quicker, and to get it to those regions that need it the most quickly enough isn't happening. And that's partly because the regions, we've seen this is quite a high profile earthquake, but often, what about the regions that are perhaps not so high profile, and those communities that are linked through economic means to these areas? This is a supply chain that's being hit. So livelihoods, the effect ripples out. And I think assistance needs to be made available quickly to help those people to retain their existence where they are and to rebuild. to just, and that needs unlocking quickly.
Yes, so Aylin, as Sharon just mentioned, this earthquakes has already triggered a mass migration from the region, but the quake-affected areas rely a lot on workers during the harvest season, which will arrive in a few months. Can survivors in the area help out? And can temporary workers be brought in? What's the solution here?
Well, the people there, in the area are like migrant workers themselves now. I mean, they don't have their shelters. They don't have shelter for their animals, but their houses are gone. Some whole villages are wiped out. So they are practically like migrant workers that will do the harvest, living in tents or container cities. And that was a problem. You know, we know that this is a global problem. Picking fruits, and this area is great in fruits. Malatya is an epicenter of apricots, and the grapes are outstanding throughout the whole region, and there's olives in Antakya area, and these are, and pistachios of Antep are world famous, and these are all dependent on migrant workers. So we have three categories of workers in the agricultural field. One, the people of the land, and they are like families helping each other. And then there are again workers, again from national workers from the nearby villagers, and there are migrant workers that migrate from country to country sometimes. For example, Georgians come every year to pick tea or hazelnuts in the Black Sea region, and the Syrian refugees were helping out with the pistachio harvest and so on. So this was a problem, and the conditions, there were many civil society organizations working on the conditions of these migrant workers. But, you know, for example, and this is a problem now, for example, the sanitary conditions and the mobile toilets and compost
Yes.
toilets. We need such know-how. Maybe the international aid can be, you know, there can be immediate measures taken in the site, but I think international know-how and expertise in environmentally friendly conditions, living conditions to create, can be very helpful.
So, Sharon, you already mentioned that this has become a global problem, but over in Syria, which is already dealing with its decade-plus civil war, food supplies are so dangerously low. What regional ramifications could emerge if food supplies are disrupted by this devastation in a wider region?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the big things that happens is that we have challenges in terms of pricing. So when supplies become short, then the prices go up, and then the access to those resources becomes uneven. So those resources with the least ability to pay, those areas with the least ability to manage those resources, then become hit the hardest. So you have huge inequalities with an area like this, and I think especially where you have political issues and particularly conflict getting in the way of that assistance getting to where it's needed. I think that does exacerbate problems where you've got unequal distribution of resources. So, and I think that's a real worry, particularly with where there's a hesitancy to just go and respond when there's an immediate response needed. And I think that there's the ramifications in terms of the response rate back to Syria was that was quite questionable.
All right, ladies, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.